One of the things you'll hear commonly in my videos here on our YouTube channel is that real estate investing is harder than people think. I sometimes have friends and family that know I'm a surveyor, and they come to me and they say, hey, I inherited some property, or I got some money and I want to be a land developer. And I tell them, no, you don't. You don't want to do it. Leave it to the professionals, right? So it's harder than people think. One of the things that makes investing in commercial real estate risky are what we call transaction costs. So transaction costs are variable. They change depending on the property and even depending on the transaction and who's involved. But transaction costs can have a significant impact on the potential profit realized on a real estate transaction. So you got to know about them if you're going to be involved in real estate. So what are transaction costs? Transaction costs are expenses that you pay to facilitate or enable a transaction. So let me give you an example from outside of real estate that will help you understand. If you're going to go buy a used car and you pay a mechanic to inspect the used car before you purchase it, want to check the engine and make sure there's not major problems. Okay, the money that you pay the mechanic to do that, that is a transaction cost, right? You're going to have to foot that money up front, pay the mechanic, whether you buy the car or not, right? Most of the time you have to pay the mechanic. Okay, so that is a price you are paying to enable the purchase of the car, right? Either you or the seller. So transaction costs have broad application in economics. This is not just a thing that happens in real estate. All transactions in our economy have transaction costs, but they are especially important in real estate. And in any kind of system where you have higher transaction costs, there are going to be fewer transactions than if you had lower transaction costs. So transaction costs are like a tax on transactions, right? So what that means is in a system with high transaction costs, there will be fewer transactions. Right? And real estate is one of those systems. So compared to other things that we transact for in our modern economy, real estate has relatively high transaction costs. In fact, some of the highest transaction costs you can find in the economy. So why is this important? Well, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but transaction costs directly impact the profit that you can earn on any transaction, and that includes both the buyer and the seller. So the buyer's worried about the money they might make on a future transaction. The seller's worried about the money they're going to make on this transaction. So both parties have an interest in the transaction cost. So I want to just give you an example from commercial real estate about how transaction costs work and how they can have an impact on your investment. So let's just say I, Landon Blake, buy a gas station on a corner lot here in Stockton. I pay $3 million for it. Okay, I plan to hold it for 5 years. Then I want to sell it. My goal is to make a 5% profit. Okay. Over 5 years, I make $300,000 or 10% of the purchase price on the operation of the gas station. So after I pay my workers, pay for the gas, pay my property taxes, pay the janitor and the landscaper, and do all that stuff, pay all the expenses of actually running the gas station business, I'm left with 10%. Okay, 10% of the purchase price in profit. Okay, but over that 5-year period, for reasons that are out of my control, the market value of that parcel has dropped 5% to $2,850,000. So it's gone down in value 150 grand. That happens, right? Real estate prices go up and down. Okay, so now here I am 5 years later, I'm trying to sell. So let's do some math. You're going to see how important real estate transaction costs are. So I go to sell my parcel and find out transaction costs will be about 10% of the current value of the parcel. That's not unreasonable, right? Most of the time you're paying your real estate broker, just your real estate broker is taking 4 to 6%, right? And there's a lot of other people to pay besides just the real estate broker. So, but let's just say, best case scenario, you get a really good deal. You can sell this parcel for 10% of the transaction costs. Okay, that means with a value of $2,850,000, your transaction costs are going to be $285,000. Okay, so if you made $300,000 in profit over 5 years on the gas station, but you've got $285,000 in transaction costs, that means by the time you pay the transaction costs, you're only left with $15,000 of profit. Okay, but you got to remember the property has gone down in value $150,000. So we take the $15,000 of profit we made on the gas station, subtract it from the $150,000 loss we had in the value of the parcel itself, and what are we left over with? We are left over with a loss of $135,000 that does not count the cost of inflation over that 5-year period. So what you can see is transaction costs really matter. They mattered in this example, right? Basically, the transaction costs of selling that $3 million lot ate the profit we made from the gas station operation over 5 years, right? And the numbers I give you in this example are not unrealistic numbers, right? For profitability of a business like a gas station or for what transaction costs would be. In fact, these numbers might even be a little bit optimistic. So what this helps you to appreciate is you can't just, it's hard to just flip properties quickly and make a profit, right? There's people that try and do that, but transaction costs eat into your ability to do that, right? So part of what makes transaction costs more palatable or more reasonable is to hold the property that you've invested in over a longer period of time. Now, there's other issues with that, other risks with that. There's opportunity cost to that, but that's part of how you mitigate transaction costs, right? There's other ways you can do it, but that's one example. So what are common transaction costs in commercial real estate? You got the fees you got to pay your broker. We talked about that. You've got attorney fees. If you're smart, you've got an attorney working for you on the transaction. You got the money you're going to have to pay for title insurance. You got the fees the lender's going to charge you. You got building inspections you have to pay for. And yes, surveys are also part of the transaction costs on a real estate transaction. So if you need to get a survey, set monuments, the bank wants to see where the easements are at. That survey is an example of a transaction cost, and it is not insignificant. The cost of a survey is usually way less than what the broker's getting paid, but it's not insignificant. And typically, the smaller the dollar value of the transaction, the larger a percentage of the transaction cost of survey will be. So that's why we survey big valuable parcels more frequently than we survey small, less valuable parcels, right? So the survey transaction costs tend to go down as a percentage of the transaction as the value of the property increases. So there you go. Now you know what are transaction costs in commercial real estate. You know why they're important. They can burn you as an investor or a land developer. So you want to watch out for those things. And remember, it's hard to just flip property, buy property and flip it after a short period to make a profit. One of the reasons that's difficult is because transaction costs are a real thing in real estate.